Hello, everyone. My name is Claire Morton, and I am the Community Assistance Manager here at MHP. Welcome to Session 5 of MHP's web series, More Than Compliance, Multifamily Districts That Work in Your Community. Where did 5 weeks go? We are officially at the halfway point of this series, and we are so excited to welcome new folks and welcome back those who've joined us before. Graciously sponsored by the Bar Foundation, this series is an important part of MHP's Technical Assistance Program for MBTA communities. In previous sessions, we learned about the benefits complete streets and neighborhoods bring to communities, water and wastewater basics for MBTA communities, and encouraging family-friendly housing in MBTA districts. Today, we'll provide guidance on action plans, how to use online tools to help visualize districts, and technical assistance available for MBTA communities. Today's speakers need no introduction as they are kind of our own affordable housing celebrities, right? Coming to our virtual stage from Massachusetts Housing Partnership is Katie Lacey, Tom Hopper, and Matija Jankovic. And from the State Department of Housing and Community Development, Chris Kluchman and Nathan Carlucci. Chris and Katie, take it away.
Do you have the slideshow up? Go ahead, Chair. Hi there, everybody. It's so nice to see folks. We're going to have a slideshow, and I'm going to do a couple slides just to remind folks about technical assistance. And then my colleague, Nate Carlucci, is going to walk through the action plans. We've had lots of questions about how the action plans work, and so we want to make sure that that's available to everybody. So Nate, if you could go to the technical assistance slide, thank you. So our very first thing that we want to share is to make sure folks know that it is our goal to provide every municipality that wants help with complying with the new rules for Section 3A or 3ATA, because we can't resist a good rhyming acronym when we have it. And so we're starting with fiscal 23, this year's grants. We're going to be telling you about some awards that are happening, and then all of them. So I also want to let folks know that in November, which is soon upon us, we'll have a sample zoning bylaw or ordinance that'll be available to everybody. That might help folks as you start thinking about the kind of text that you need to adopt. And we'll also be presenting a user guide that'll walk folks through the 17 pages of single-spaced guidelines that we've created that are fairly technical. So the user guide will take a more layperson approach and walk you through the steps that you want to take, thinking about the location and the size and the density. Next slide, please, Nate. So I'm happy to be able to tell folks today that through the Community One-Stop program, DHCD runs 3 different grant programs, and those awards have just been announced to the communities, although there has not been a formal announcement, but 14 of the grants that we're giving this year are going for MBTA community compliance. We had 14 applications and we funded all of those. And part of that, if you were part of the Community One-Stop, you may have seen that applications for MBTA community compliance received bonus points. This is almost $800,000 worth of grant funds that'll be available all the way through June of 2024 for those 14 communities to work on their projects. The next Community One-Stop grant round will open up in the winter with the expression of interest, and then the application period, similar to this year, will be in May. Again, this slide shows all of the other agencies and folks who are providing technical assistance. There are many of them. We've covered this in some of the other presentations. And I just want to note that Mass Housing Partnerships technical assistance application process has just opened, and the web link is here at the bottom of this slide. With that very brief overview of technical assistance, I'm going to turn it over to Nate, and he's going to talk about action plans.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks, Chris. Today's a great opportunity to kind of dive into the action plans and the concept of interim compliance with Section 3A. We've actually received a lot of questions and even some requests for technical assistance regarding action plans from a number of different communities. So today is an opportunity to kind of jump into what communities actually have to do. And I'm hopeful that when we go through this process together here, we can understand that it's a pretty achievable, easy to use form. So the first thing that I want to do is share this slide that I like to start all the presentations with that shows the actual Section 3A statute. And without diving into it.
Can you hold on for 1 second? We're having an echo. So just.
My apologies for a quick technical issue.
I'm gonna just. Yeah.
Okay. Hi, is everybody still here? Okay. So you might notice in the statute, there is no effective date. The concept of interim compliance was actually introduced in DHCD's compliance guidelines. And what we wanted to do there was create an opportunity for MBTA communities to, not be subjected to the penalties for non-compliance in the statute and have some activities that they can undertake to show that they're making progress towards their district compliance benchmarks. So at the top of this slide, you'll see the section from the guidelines that introduces the concept of interim compliance, and that's found in Section 9. And all you have to do to achieve interim compliance is to submit one of these action plans by January 31st, 2023, and have it approved by us. And it is pretty straightforward and easy to have approved. So we'll start with the process of actually finding the action plan. You can find it on our website, easy to remember, mass.gov/MBTA communities. And if you look at the table of contents, you'll see on the left image, there's a section called Complying with Section 3A Guidelines. You click there, the screen will drop you down to the section on interim compliance, and there are 2 links in that section. The one highlighted or enclosed in red, Submit an Action Plan, is the official link that you use to electronically submit your action plan. We're only accepting action plans through that link, but we have also provided an action plan PDF that you can download from the button directly to the right of the Submit an Action Plan button. The action plan, when you click on the PDF form, it could be a little more confusing because it contains logic-driven questions that only appear based on certain answers that you would do electronically. So it will be more straightforward when you do the electronic-only version. When you get into the action plan and start to fill it out, there's some introductory information. There's a reminder that the deadline is January 31st, 2023. And there's also a note at the top here that the action plan needs to be submitted by a municipal official that has authority to act on behalf of the municipality on matters of zoning. We actually have had questions from just residents of communities that are excited about their community's potential compliance and want to submit an action plan, but actually it has to be submitted by a municipal official. So when you start to fill out the action plan form, the very first section called Identification establishes what your specific community's requirements from the guidelines are. So in 1.1, there'll be a drop-down menu. All you have to do is select your community name. And in 1.2, you're going to select the community category that your community has from listed in the guidelines. In Appendix 1 of the guidelines, you can find your community category that you're probably already familiar with. As the identification section continues, we do ask you to restate your community's multifamily unit capacity requirement. That also is found in Appendix 1 of the guidelines, and you can find it in an interface on our MBTA community's website as well. The reason that we ask for that, even though we already know the answer, is just to be sure that we're on the same page and sort of give the community an opportunity to confirm what their requirement is. After that requirement is restated, there's a series of questions about the potential transit stations that exist in or near your community. And there's some logic that follows based on the answers that you provide. The reason why we have this little path of logic with transit stations is to help communities understand why they belong to the category that they do. When you dive into the guidelines, you'll see that it's not a transit station alone that affects your community category or your district location requirements. It's this greater concept called developable station area, which is the developable land around a transit station. So this series of questions will walk you through the logic that the guidelines actually use to determine your community category. So I have two examples on this page. In the example on the left, you have a rapid transit community that states that it does have a rapid transit station within its boundaries, and that community then just lists the rapid transit stations that are in that municipality, and that's giving you a pretty good idea of where you should locate your district. On the other hand, you have an example on the right where a community stated that it's a rapid transit community, but it does not have any rapid transit stations within its boundaries. So then this action plan form gives you an explanation of why you're a rapid transit community. It's going to say that even though you don't have a transit station in your boundaries, you do have at least 100 acres of developable station area. So this is really intended to just help you understand why you're in the category that you're in. Finally, in the identification section, we just have an area for you to fill out the name of the person who's completing the form. This is just really to provide some contact information for us if there's questions about the action plan or other topics that we need to discuss related to 3A. And there's also a section to list other members of the core team that's developing your multifamily zoning. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's just an opportunity to let us know who else is involved. Section 2 is pretty brief. It's a housing overview section, and we're just asking some questions about what other housing strategies are going on in your community. It's intended to be an opportunity to think about how Section 3A might intersect with your other housing and planning goals. So it's pretty brief, and we're just, again, it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but we're just asking for you to think about what other goals and strategies are out there in your community that you're thinking about adjacent to 3A. More specifically related to Section 3A is the third section of the action plan, preliminary zoning strategies. And in this section, I want to emphasize that we're just asking what you're thinking about right now. What you put here might not ultimately be what you do. You might change your mind relatively quickly. It might be exactly what you do, but it's not a commitment to a particular strategy. It gives you an opportunity to think about what kinds of zoning amendments you might need to make in order to comply with Section 3A. And it also gives us a pretty good overview on where communities typically stand, where they're at the moment, what kind of changes they might need to make. And it's a chance to sort of anticipate things like how many communities are thinking they're going to amend an existing district, how many are thinking that they might have a new overlay district, how many might do 40R. So we're viewing this action plan as a preliminary brainstorming moment in the overall process. We do give you an opportunity to provide a little written explanation if you want to share additional strategies and thoughts in this section. And there's also an opportunity to attach a file if there's anything that you want to share. It's certainly not a requirement. The reason that it's on there is because in the community information form that you may remember from last year, a lot of communities did provide various documents showing some potential district boundaries and things of that nature that they wanted to share. So you do have that opportunity. Finally, there is a question about what non-housing characteristics are important to a community to consider in its 3A zoning district. And I'd also add that sometimes there are other housing characteristics that are important to a community that might not be compatible with your 3A zoning district. For example, if it's critical to have a district with a mandatory retail commercial component, that doesn't count for 3A compliance. So you might want to have that goal exist outside of a 3A district. Finally, section 4 is maybe the most important part of completing your action plan. And what we're asking for here is just to lay out a schedule of what you anticipate to be the periods of time where you're working on certain tasks towards developing your zoning. So when you're filling this out, you can put whatever you want, but you have to have a schedule that aligns with your district compliance deadline that gives you a reasonable opportunity to adopt compliant zoning before that deadline hits. And I would add that similar to other sections, this is just a preliminary schedule. This is what you're thinking now. This is not a formal commitment to exactly hit on the dates that you set forth in this schedule, but it's pretty easy to fill out. You just, in the section that says short answer, you write a brief description of what the activity is going to be, and the little drop-down menus to the right of that answer give you a chance to input what the dates are for that activity. So people are curious about what the implications are for the action plan that has been submitted. And here I would reiterate what I said on the previous slide. DHCD will review the progress that communities have made towards implementing their action plans when they apply for funds through, for example, the Housing Choice Initiative. And when we're looking for that action plan implementation activity, the review is going to focus on major departures from the plan with the understanding that the schedules set forth in the plan are estimates. We want to make sure that you're doing something, that it's not, that the compliance activity has been abandoned. The bottom schedule here sets forth the action plan deadline. I probably said it a few times in this presentation, but it's January 31st, 2023, and that's for every community. The district compliance deadlines do vary based on your community category, but for the action plan, it's just January 31st, 2023. And that's a deadline that gives us a chance to review action plans and issue determinations of compliance before the funding rounds open next year. So finally, I have a couple suggestions when you are completing an action plan. The first one is to maybe consider waiting to submit the plan until after DHCD releases its compliance model. You've probably heard about the compliance model in other presentations, and that is an automated tool that will be used to measure certain zoning and density metrics, to establish compliance with Section 3A. And the reason for making this suggestion is that when that tool is available, it'll give you an opportunity to do some scenario building, to look at different areas of your community and figure out where the best opportunity is to locate a district. So if you wanted to, in the process of filling out your action plan, have an even better idea of what strategies you're considering using for compliance, using the compliance model will really help you hone in on the best opportunities. It's also going to be released, as Chris mentioned, along with a sample bylaw. We're going to have a user guide for 3A. So there's plenty of good material coming out in November that'll help you have maybe a more accurate action plan. Secondly, I would say that for many communities, you may want to develop a more robust action plan on the local level. The action plan that we're asking for compliance purposes is, it's a form. It's not very detailed or involved. I've actually received previously from an MBTA community and a great action plan that they developed locally that has a lot more detail than what we're asking for. So if you're thinking about, hey, this is a deadline that's coming up, but we need time to develop this, more sophisticated plan, you can still fill out our form and submit it and develop something that's more complex locally. And finally, the third suggestion is to look at the duration of time that exists between when you submit your action plan and when the district compliance deadline happens to fall, and leave a contingency, leave a buffer for the unknown, for activities that might take longer than you might expect. So with that, I just let you know that the guidelines and other resources are, again, they're available at our website, mass.gov/MBTA communities. If you have any technical questions about the requirements of Section 3A, we have an inbox, DHCD 3A@mass.gov, that I encourage you to send an email to with a question about the interpretation of the guidelines, location requirements, anything of that nature. Now, that's an inbox that our whole team has access to, and we can get to your question. We get a lot of questions, so there can be a little bit of a turnaround time. If you have something urgent, I encourage you to email me directly, nathan.carlucci@mass.gov, and I'll try to get to your question as soon as possible. That does it for me. We'll turn it back to you guys.
Thank you, Nate. I think at this point, we're going to go ahead and do some quick question and answer, a quick Q&A on this portion of your presentation. There's been some chat in the chat box here, so I'll go ahead and throw some questions out to you and Chris, and you all can take it away at that point. Is that okay? Cool. So let's think about, one question is, does the compliance model need to be done with the action plan, or is that for final approval? I think we kind of talked about that a little.
Yeah, so the compliance model, passing the compliance model is a requirement for your district compliance, your final approval. But I do want to reiterate, I think it's a useful tool to sort of play around with when you're filling out your action plan, that you can use that compliance model to test scenarios and choose a good path. And, and again, when you're putting those preliminary thoughts forward on your action plan, it's not a commitment, but I do think that the compliance model will be helpful in helping you choose a preliminary strategy to put down.
So along those lines, do we know when exactly it'll be released yet?
It will be released in November of 2022.
Great. Another question that we had is, what are your recommendations for aligning MBTA communities and complete neighborhoods, 15-minute neighborhoods?
I'll take that one. I'll take a stab at that. And I would invite my colleague, Katie Lacey, to weigh in if she wants to. So MHP has had this wonderful webinar series about complete neighborhoods. And we think that the strategies and best practices that those have been identified in those presentations are absolutely the kinds of things that you should be thinking about as you're thinking about your MBTA communities or 3A multifamily district. You just need to make sure that you're aligning yourself with all the requirements in the guidelines. There are these locational requirements, but we think that a lot of those best practices are going to come in very handy. Put your district where there is existing development, where there's existing activities, and have a well-rounded set of uses that are allowed.
Chris nailed it.
Great, sounds good, thank you. What if you go through this process and make all the zoning changes and it's defeated by in the town meeting? And also, what if you have received housing choice funding and then town meeting defeats the zoning changes? Then what?
So I'll take a stab at that. And part of it really relates to the action plan. And I would suggest, as you're thinking about your action plan schedules, if you are concerned that one town meeting may not suffice, you may want to build into your schedule that you have time for a backup town meeting or a special town meeting. Now, there are a variety of different kinds of town meeting schedules, or even city council or town council schedules that occur. Some towns only have one town meeting a year. Some towns have two. Some towns want zoning in only one of those, but not the other. Some towns have special town meetings. So to the extent that you can build in time for more than one town meeting. We've all been part of many, many different kinds of town meetings, and it's my experience that you often need two bites of the apple for complex and controversial processes. But often the second time, people have had time to kind of get more with what's going on and may understand the issue a little bit better. So I think if you're worried about that, I would think about that in your scheduling. In terms of the funding, we don't have a clawback requirement for the grants that have been received already. The statute says that you're ineligible to receive funding. And the way that we interpret that is you would be ineligible to receive future funding if you are in a state of non-compliance. So for example, if you do not submit an action plan by January 31st and you have not yet achieved district compliance, then you would be ineligible for the next grant round that would start in May for the Housing Choice and MassWorks funds. And furthermore, the local capital projects funds for fiscal 23 is funding approximately 10% of housing authority funding. I can't speak to what the legislature is going to do next year, but they have for the last several years had that fund as 10% of the housing authority funding. So if you have a local housing authority, you could see a consequence of that housing authority being constrained by 10%, by losing 10% of its budget. Again, I don't know what's going to happen for fiscal 24, but that has been a the budget. That's what's been happening for the last several years.
Okay, thank you. Can you, on the form section 3.1, can you check off more than one type of zoning vehicle?
Yes, absolutely. That's designed so that you can check off as many as you want. And as you complete the form, each time that you select one of those strategies gives you a new opportunity to explain it if you want to as well. A new text box will appear below that choice.
Okay. So user-friendly and open, love to hear it. The affordability component will be increased from 20% to 25%, and that 40R district approved prior to the guidelines were released will be deemed pre-existing. Are you able to verify this at this point?
Sounds like a really specific technical question, and I think I'd suggest that you send that question to Nate or myself, or to the DHCD 3A at mass.gov if you have a specific question about a 40R district. The current affordability limits, as listed in the guidelines, are up to 20%. But I would like to note that we have heard from many communities about concerns about the section 4B, which is the affordability limitations for inclusionary zoning. So we've heard lots of concerns from folks who are trying to do the right thing. So I just ask folks to stay tuned. Stay tuned.
If you don't mind, really quickly, just repeating one more time, what date in November, when the compliance model will be released?
We don't have a specific date in November identified. I just want to note that the team developing the compliance model has done a great job. And right now they're doing some final testing of that product. It's intended to be a tool that's really helpful for communities as well as helpful to us. And we're just doing our best to make sure that we deliver a really good product, the best product that we can. So as soon as we believe that we've reached that point, it'll be released, and we endeavor to get that out as quickly as possible.
All righty. My community does not have a transit system area and therefore no location requirements. How can we get more direction about where to locate our 3A district?
Are you going, Chris, or?
Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, so for adjacent communities and for adjacent small towns, there's no specific location requirement. The statute doesn't set forth a location requirement if you don't have that 1/2 mile proximity to a transit station. So you can put your district anywhere you want. We certainly encourage communities to consider putting their districts in locations that are best suited for multifamily housing. So an example of that would be a village center, maybe somewhere that has infrastructure to support the development, and particularly somewhere that would make sense for residents of future multifamily developments to be able to access other services, municipal services, retail services. So I would again say that, you can use some of the tools that are available to look at the different types of lands that are in your community, what's developable and what's not developable. And even also consider maybe regional transit services that have bus service to transit stations that exist in communities that are adjacent.
All righty. And I also want to mention that next week we do have the next week's session is on citing your adjacent district. I think that's actually in 2 weeks, don't quote me, but just know that we're gonna address that topic as well. And I think I'm gonna take one more question so we can move on, because Tom and Matija have been patiently waiting to provide us with some great info. So we're gonna go ahead and have one more question for Nate and Chris. Can you give us an idea of what type of data we need to collect or input into the compliance model?
Sure. So, there have been other presentations on the compliance model, and there may be people that can go into more detail than I can on this, but to just give you a brief idea of what the compliance model is going to do, there's a little bit of a GIS function where the community is going to have kind of land shape files. And the community is going to sort of designate the parcels that are going to be included in the proposed zoning district. But then there's a workbook, and the workbook is where sort of the planner comes into play in terms of looking at your existing or proposed zoning bylaw and inputting the zoning metrics, that regulate the density and the usage of that district. So others could go into more detail on this topic, but for example, you would input something like the number of units that are permitted on a given lot, the minimum lot size, the maximum building height, and parking requirements absolutely play a big role in this, because the model does make assumptions about the amount of land that parking requirements require to be occupied by parking lots, and sort of limit the potential for housing units to be developed on a site.
All righty. Thank you, Nate. At this point, we're going to go ahead and pivot a little bit. We'll still continue to monitor the chat, but we're going to go ahead and pivot over to Tom and Matija for their part of this program.
Great. Thank you, Claire. Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Hopper. I'm the Director of Research and Analytics at MHP Center for Housing Data, and I'm joined by my colleague, Matija Jankovic. And we're going to talk about a few data tools that we think will be helpful to you as you start to think about how to approach Section 3A or the MBTA communities requirements. But before we jump in, I just want to acknowledge something, and I'm glad I put this slide in here because I think it was clear from the Q&A that we just had. Municipal staffers are in a tough position on Section 3A. If you've been going to these webinars over the past few weeks, we've been talking about complete neighborhoods. We've been talking about these big regional challenges around housing production, around transportation and climate, racial equity, economic growth. And some of these solutions, and specifically increased density and near transit, some of those solutions to the regional needs are often at odds with the political will in your community. and some of those local perceptions. And as local planners, as municipal staffers, finding a way to thread that needle, meet those regional demands, these state requirements, while still satisfying some of those local concerns, that's a really tough needle to thread. But here's where we are, right? The state has said, and it's absolutely true, that in order to make progress on our regional housing shortage and some of our housing issues in the region, we need to focus on these areas as priority locations for increased housing development and increased density. But we know that the success of this law comes down to how you all implement this on the local level. The guidelines are pretty flexible. I'm confident that most communities are going to have multiple options for where and how they create their districts. For example, you might have an existing 40B development on the edge of your town, and that might be really attractive because it's politically easier, but it might have really few benefits from a policy perspective. Or you might have a historic town center or a Main Street corridor that people love and is the heart of your community, but has a lot of pre-existing non-conforming lots. And upzoning these areas might be a great move from a policy perspective, but can be tough or intimidating to approach if you don't have an active pro-housing coalition in your town, because nobody wants to feel beat up at a public meeting. So we know that one of the most important things we can do right now at MHP as a technical assistance provider, and I know a lot of our partners are thinking the same way, we want to be the wind in your sails, right? We want to provide you with information, resources, and support to help you explore all of your options and really, support you as you do that calculus on what the right approach to your town is. And we want to engage with you in that planning process. And that goes hand in hand with what my team at the Center for Housing Data thinks of as our community data goals. We conduct research and we create tools that give you information to hopefully have better conversations around housing needs. And we know that those better conversations lead to better outcomes as well. We love hearing about local stories, success, failures, struggles, what your concerns are, because the more we can learn from that local experience and work with our colleagues at MHP's community assistance team, we can incorporate that into our research and drive better products for you in the future. And lastly, we don't want to be holding all the data. We don't want to be interpreting everything for you. It's really important for us to create information and tools and promote greater data literacy to put the power in your hands to use that information and feel confident about using that information to talk about your local needs. So here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to give an overview of 3 web-based resources that MHP has developed over the past few years that we think will be helpful as you plan for Section 3A. We're going to do some site demonstrations, and then we're going to end with hopefully a good amount of time for Q&A. And we'd also like to talk about your local data needs. We're confident that these 3 tools we're going to show you today have a lot of great and helpful information to help you start to plan, but we also know that some things are missing and that you've got some data gaps that you'd like to fill. So I think a question I'm going to pose to you now that I hope you think about over the next 20 minutes or so and get back to me in Q&A. We'd love to hear from you what information, what resources, what additional tools would be helpful to you to better plan for these MBTA community requirements. So with that, we're going to jump into our first tool, which is DataTown. DataTown's been around for a few years and gets a lot of local use. And so hopefully you've encountered this in the wild before. I'm going to get into a site demo in just a minute, but here's a quick screenshot of the tool with the URL at the top if you'd like to visit the site and play along at home while I do the demo. Before I jump into the site, just want to give a really brief overview of what DataTown features. It's really a data aggregator. We've collected and downloaded municipal level data from common publicly available data sources like the Census Bureau, like DLS, like the Department of Education, and many others. We automate the retrieval and cleaning of those data sets, and we update them every year. Some of these get updated multiple times a year. Because we want you to spend more time working with the data and learning about your community than cleaning this data. So all of this is available at the click of a button. We're also generating charts and graphs on the fly so that you can grab images of those and use them in presentations, reports, social media, and any other materials you're working with. We also have my favorite feature of the site is a compare communities feature where you can look at a number of metrics, and you've got a little preview on the side here with the table of contents I've provided. You can compare your community with peer communities. You can compare your community with surrounding communities if you want to take a regional approach as well. And for those of you who don't work with the data sources on a regular basis like we do, we're trying to provide coaching text and explainers about how the data is collected and what's in it to assist you with interpretation. So with that, bear with me, I'm going to do an awkward transition from sharing a PowerPoint slide to going into a web browser. So just hold on one moment. Oop. Sorry about that. Sorry, bear with me 1 second. Sorry, I had the site up 1 moment ago, and of course, as soon as I go to present it, we're getting an error message.
I think we might be getting some more traffic on the site. It might be
I think that might be right. So it just might take me to a second to load. I maybe should not have directed all of you to flood our website with traffic. Classic move. So if you are on the site, if you could help me out for a second and just close out and wait till I'm done with the demo to sign in, I think that'd be great for me. There we go. We're on. Okay. Sorry about that delay. Thank you for everybody who jumped off the site. Let's get into the demo without further ado. When you land on the site, you're welcomed with a little bit about the site, some information about what we've updated recently, as well as some contact information if you have any questions or want to see something further. Here on the left side of the screen, you get a couple of options in our toolbar. You can explore a single community on a number of metrics, or you can compare communities. To start us off, we're going to look at the Explore One Community feature. And I'm just going to, on the fly, I don't know, let's pick Littleton. It's just where my cursor landed. Sorry, Littleton. I'll browse around so you're not getting picked on during the demo. But if you expand this toolbar, you can start to see the range of topics that we're covering in Datatown. I'm going to show you a few of those, but I encourage you to explore the rest of them on your time. First is population. When you choose population, you're greeted pretty immediately with a chart showing population change in Littleton from 1930 to 2020. When you hover, you get some tooltips so you can get the exact data points. And as I mentioned in the features, there's some quick download links. You can just click them and you'll see in your downloads folder, you'll get an easy to use CSV file with the data you're seeing in the chart. You can also click this button to download a PNG image that you can immediately copy and paste into any document that you're working with. Just to go over a few more of the topics that we cover, I'd like to show you the age distribution chart because it's one of my favorites because we can explore over time. So let's start at 1990 in Littleton. If I'm doing a quick interpretation of this chart, I'm seeing a good amount of school-age children in the town in 1990, as well as some adults in their 30s and 40s, and presumably a lot of families with children moving in, which is a common occurrence in the 90s in a lot of our suburban communities. For every table, for every chart that we can, we're providing a comparison between the town, so Littleton in blue, and the state. These hollow bars represent the state. And so you're able to make a comparison on how your town is performing relative to the state level. You can move through time here on this chart. If I click on 2000, you can see the demographics starting to shift, and some of those families that may have moved in when they were in, when the adults were in their 30s are now in their 40s, and their children are moving through the age brackets as well. And moving into 2010, you can see that move even further to the right. And so this is telling a story, right? A story about population growth in the 90s, a story about family formation, and a story where a lot of families are not leaving the town and perhaps providing evidence that new families are not moving in. And so that is a pretty common story in a lot of our suburban communities. Just touching briefly on some of these other categories, we have information on the housing inventory. So how much of the housing is multifamily versus single family. Sorry, Littleton, if you're here, I'm going to change communities to get a little different flavor. Here is Melrose, and we're seeing the comparison between single family. We've got a higher proportion of single family in Melrose than we do in the state, but we're also seeing a fair amount of large multifamily. And so through these state comparisons, through exploring your community, you can kind of see how you stack up. Now, I'd like to briefly show you the Compare Communities feature. So to do this, you just click this radio button, and in the dialog box, you can just choose a number of communities. I'm just going to go through quickly and not relatively randomly, completely randomly, just choose a good amount of communities. Now that I've chosen those, all of these charts on all of these categories have populated. And so I'm going to click on a few. Tenure mix is one of my favorite data points for comparison because we can see a pretty wide range across Massachusetts. And so in this example, we can see Malden has majority renter occupied over about 58%. And that varies greatly from most of the other communities I've randomly selected, mostly rural and suburban communities where rental housing is harder to come by. We also have information on things like race and ethnicity. And so you can see the variety and the range here. We have information about commutes and employment and the labor force, housing production from the Census Bureau's building permit survey. You'll get a little chart showing permitting activity for each of the communities that you've selected, along with what types of units were permitted in what year. And so that's a basic overview. I'm going to stop sharing now, and then one more awkward time, go back to my PowerPoint slides. Great. And before we go on to our next resource, I just want to show a few examples of how folks have used DataTown to talk about housing issues in their community. Here's a slide with 3 tweets that have been sent over the past few years since DataTown was released. The first on the left here comes from the town of Littleton, looking at housing production and specifically low levels of multifamily housing production and recent declines in school enrollment. Here in the center in the city of Salem, we've got the juxtaposition of a few different data points. We have the age of the existing housing stock with building permit activity and also housing cost burden, making the case for the need for more housing production, both market rate and affordable. And then lastly, we have an exploration of the change in age demographics, similar to what I just demoed on the site for the town of Sudbury, showing that similar dynamic of families aging and fewer new families coming in to the community. All right, so with that, I'm going to move on to our next website called TODEX, the Transit-Oriented Development Explorer. And I'm going to learn my lesson and say, please do not go to the URL until I've concluded the demo. But I do encourage you after the demo to go visit the site and explore on your own. Before I jump into the demo, just a few features I'd like to highlight. TODEX is a map explorer, and it includes housing unit counts and residential density estimates for every parcel within half a mile of 261 distinct MBTA rail stations. The site includes high-resolution map images that show density patterns, and they're downloadable at the click of a button. We also have a data table with information for each and every one of these station areas that's sortable, filterable, and you can download and use that in Excel or some other analytical software. We also wrote a research brief summarizing the key findings from our research and highlighting the value of TOD. We have a detailed methodological walkthrough, and as is the case with all of our data sets, the ability to download that for free for further research if you want to use that in GIS. Okay, so one more awkward transition here. I'm going to go back to my browser. and show you the site. So when you land on Todex, you get to our Map Explorer with a splash page with information about how to get started. But it is really easy to get started. Each of these little turquoise areas is representational of a station area. So I'm going to click Newtonville, and you'll see as soon as I click on it, I get an image of that station area with some information about the neighborhood. So we've got a map with each parcel colored with its density colored in, and we've got a legend here. As well as information about the station area as a whole. So it's the Newtonville station, it's on the Worcester line. If there are multiple communities within the half mile, they'll be listed here. There's about 2,400 residential units in that neighborhood and an average density of 5 units per acre. Again, you can click this button to automatically download an image of that map to use in whatever products you're using, or if you just want it on your desktop. And I just encourage you on your own time to click around this. You can see a lot of different density patterns in different kinds of neighborhoods. We've got some commuter rail neighborhoods. We have some neighborhoods within the city of Boston. Here's my neighborhood at Shawmut, reaching about 14 units per acre. Just going through the other tabs on the site, we have our data tab, which lists each of these station areas with the relevant information from those images. You can sort by density, low to high, high to low, residential units as well. You can filter this list by a specific line or a specific town as well. And you can, once you've manipulated that table, you can download it to use it in whatever you're working on. We also have a research brief that I mentioned where we are talking about the benefits of TOD. We're doing some summary statistics and an analysis of the system as a whole. We're talking about what density looks like at different density levels. And then we're going into some individual station area analysis. So I encourage you to read through this when you have the time. We've used this a lot and referenced it a lot in our policy thinking around TOD. And then lastly, we have our methodology section. It's annotated with images. So if you want to know exactly how we constructed this data set, that information is there for you. And at the bottom of the page, we do have a download link if you want to download a GIS map layer package and work with this data on your own. Okay, back to our PowerPoint. Before I hand things over to Matija to talk about our last tool, I do want to go over some of our high-level findings from our Todex research. First, we found that across the system, we had a very low average density near transit. We had just 6.6 homes per acre across the system. And 113 of the 261 station areas that we analyzed had an average gross density of less than 5 units per acre. And that is very low density. Most of those low density station areas are located along the commuter rail. We did some simple math too and said if we increase that average density from 6.6 homes per acre to 10 homes per acre, we would have almost 250,000 more housing units in the region. And that would go a whole long way towards meeting our regional demand for housing and alleviating our housing shortage. And lastly, we determined that the wide variation in development patterns and density patterns that we've seen are the result of inconsistent zoning and differences in the commitment to TOD and higher density residential development around transit across municipalities. So I don't want to spend too much time on the application of Todex because we have come out with a brand new tool that we think will provide a better set of use cases for MBTA communities. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Matija to talk a little bit about our brand new site, Residensity. Over to you, Matija.
Awesome. Thank you for the intro, Tom. I just want to clarify the site is not out yet. It's still coming soon, but we're really excited to release the site. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this new data tool. Some of you may have already heard about this tool and some other presentations we've done, but we're just really excited to release it. I think planners can get a lot of use out of this. And also just wanted to mention, I saw a comment in the chat about Todex not having information on places that don't have transit stations, and this is the site for you. So I'm excited we got that question because it leads well into this. So if you can go to the next slide, please. And I can just talk about what Residency is. So Residency is an intuitive and completely free to use online GIS platform that our teams developed. And it allows users to explore residential density patterns anywhere in Massachusetts. So it deploys a similar methodology to Todex to estimate housing units at the parcel level and calculate parcel level density statistics. And where it differs from Todex is that it has density estimates for nearly every residential parcel in the state. And each of those parcels is interactive. So if we were on the site here, if you just go to this map, you could click on any of those parcels and see what the address is, what the density is, what the use description is, and so on. And like I mentioned, each parcel has a bunch of information you can interact with. It also allows users to measure density statistics for any user-defined district. And a way we can think about that is in Todex, we have those circles that we use to define the station areas, and we try to identify the density in that circle. In this site, you can draw a shape like this one. This is just some weird shape that was just drawn on the map, and it'll tell you everything you want to know about that shape. And then lastly, you can export custom density maps in PDF format. You can export shape files, and you can export tabular data straight from our site that you can use in any way. So we think this is going to be a really useful tool that will assist communities in planning for the new Mbta zoning guidelines for multifamily districts. And next slide, please. And I just want to take a moment to clarify, since we've gotten some feedback that there's been some confusion about this point before. Residency is not a tool for testing compliance with the MBTA zoning requirements. And just to elaborate slightly, compliance with the MBTA zoning requirements is determined by unit capacity of zoning districts, but not what's actually on the ground. So I have some images here that kind of go over that, but I won't get too into that. But it's just important to note that the law is about zoning capacity, and our site just shows our best representation of what's actually on the ground. Next slide, please. I just want to think about, so how can planners use Residency? Residency, we think you can use it to take stock of density in your community, to see patterns and identify concentrations of density, high density, low density in your community in a standardized sort of format. You can also calculate district level density on the ground in any custom area. So for example, if you have an existing zoning district, you could draw that district on the map and just get a sense of what the district level density is in one of your residential zoning districts. We also think our density maps can be a useful tool for informing some smart planning decisions. So for instance, identifying areas of missed opportunity. And like we mentioned, with Todex, we focused on the commuter stations and rapid transit stations, maybe thinking about bus corridors in your community that could benefit from greater density. We think we can use density for case-making purposes and communicating about density to stakeholders. And so, for instance, a lot of times we don't always have a great understanding, or the public and people in general, and Tom and I, before we did a lot of this work, didn't have a great understanding of, what, for instance, 15 units per acre looks like. But it's likely that somewhere in your community, you might have a block of housing at 15 units per acre, and maybe having a tool like this and being able to highlight that data can just show members of your community that maybe these are places that we're familiar with, that we're comfortable with, and that the community enjoys. And lastly, we think Residency will be a great tool for people interested in doing research and analysis, since our data will be downloadable. And as soon as our site is made available to the public, our data will also be downloadable and available to the public. So next slide, and I'm just going to give a quick overview of two analyses we did using Residency. This example here is in Spencer, Massachusetts. In the blue here, you can see a district that we drew in the downtown area and found out some interesting things that we didn't, some interesting things about a community that Tom and I weren't familiar with beforehand. And what the tool does when you draw a district is it tells you how many units are in that district. It can tell you the size of that district, the district area, and it can give you an estimate of the district-wide level of density. In this case, this big district in downtown area has a density of about 4.6 units per acre. The site will also break down the different uses within that district. In this case, you can see that a lot of the units are in apartments with 4 to 8 units and so on. So it just aggregates all the information and tries to put it in a relatively straightforward to interpret format. Next slide, please. The next example is in Chelsea. So similar to the last one, we drew a district in Chelsea and got information on what's in that district. So this is a very different district with a lot more units over a much larger area at a district density of about 27.2 units per acre. One thing that we didn't include in this presentation, but we have in the past, is pairing our density maps with, for instance, Google Street View imagery, and just giving people a sense of, you know, when you look at this map, it doesn't tell the whole story. And when you look at, you know, a picture on the ground, it also doesn't tell the whole story, but pairing those two kind of helps tell the story of what different density levels look like in your community. I can go to the next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to transition over to a demo of the site and give you a preview of what using Residensity actually looks like. And I'm also now going to do the awkward transition over. Let's see. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Yeah, okay, awesome. So I'm just gonna jump straight into the site by zooming into a community. This is just what the site looks like. This is the map interface. You can zoom in, you can click on anything, get information. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom into Arlington. I'm going specifically to Arlington because I think the community has a really nice mix of densities, and it helps just sort of display what kind of information our site can show. So what you see here, this layer full of all the different colors and little shapes, is our parcel density layer. These colors, I'm going to open the legend of the site here. The colors represent different levels of density. So the darker colors represent higher levels of density, and lighter represent lower density. And you can see some of the concentrations. We see East Arlington has some of these darker parcels compared to some other areas. And then along this Mass Ave corridor, we can also see a bit more of these darker parcels. So we can sort of get a sense of where density is concentrated in the community. When we're in the site, we can click on any parcel and get some more information on it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this parcel here. The one I've selected, the address is 84 School Street in Arlington, and our site can give you a use description of any parcel. This is a single family home with one residential unit. It calculates this parcel density in units per acre by dividing the residential units with the size of the parcel, giving a parcel density on a single family home of about 7.8 units per acre. And this is just one way of exploring data in Residensity. You can pan around, you can click on any parcel, or you can put in an address in the search bar and it will just take you right to that parcel. You can also draw districts anywhere on Residensity using our district analysis tool. This is a custom tool we've developed to specifically work with this parcel density layer. So I'm just going to demo that a little bit, but the way it works is you just go ahead and draw a shape anywhere on the site. I'm going to do my best to select parcels just right in this polygon. And when I select the district, it's going to give you some information about the district that we just covered. So this district here, you'll see the statistics. It might be a little small, so hopefully you all can read this, but In the district I just drew, we have about 147 units over a district area of about 26 acres, giving us a district density of about 5.64 units per acre. It'll also give you a breakdown of the different kinds of uses within that district. So we can see that the majority are single family. There's about 140 single family homes in this district that we drew. Some condominiums, 2 families, and so on. Another thing that you can do is you can compare districts really easily. So I'm going to go ahead and draw another district over here in the slightly denser area in East Arlington to see how it compares to this first district. And hopefully what's coming across is that it's pretty easy to use the site. You really just draw your district and it'll give you information right away on just density and different types of housing in these districts. So if I click on the second district, we can see the relatively similar sizes. This one's about 26 acres as well, but it has significantly more residential units, in this case 403 units, giving us a district density of about 15.17 units per acre. And then looking at the parcel breakdown, we can see a lot more 2-family homes in this district, more condominiums and 3 families. And another thing I just want to note, just looking at these different uses, we also calculate the average parcel density for the different uses. And it's sort of a way of gauging, how many units per acre different uses are achieving. So single family homes, as we'd assume, have much lower average parcel density compared to 2-family homes. You see the 18.6 compared to about 8.3. And this is just a couple easy ways to use the site. And then lastly, you can print maps from the site. So I can print a custom map of this district that I drew. I can also download a CSV of this parcel breakdown table. I can download a CSV of or tabular data of the parcel that we see here. So we can just be able to take these into another software if we want to work in Excel and do some other sort of analyses on this. And lastly, we can download a shapefile of all of the parcels and the district boundary itself. And with that, that's the end of this demo. I'm just going to jump back to the presentation. Okay, thank you, Tom. And just give me one quick second. Okay, so as we mentioned, the site is still in development, but we are nearly ready to release the site to the public. And in the meantime, we are looking for some beta testers just to give folks some early access to the site. So if you're interested in getting some early access, I'm putting a link in the chat. And if you can just fill out this form, also the QR code, you can scan that with your phone and it'll take you straight to the form. But if you fill that out, hopefully in the next week or so, we would really love to send you all a link to the site and eventually get some feedback as we're preparing for the full release. And lastly, you can follow us on Twitter for more information. So with that, thanks so much for listening to the presentation. We're going to transition over to some Q&A and enjoyed the demo.
Yeah, can't wait for that to drop. That is amazing. All of these resources are absolutely fantastic. I think some of the questions are around an estimated release date. If you guys have any idea of that.
Sure, yeah. We don't have an exact release date, but as you can see, the site is operational, it's functional. There are just a few last things that we're working on to get it ready and, the most user-friendly it can be for folks. But we are, a matter of just a couple weeks away from that beta release. And so for folks who are eager to interact with the site, I really encourage you to follow that link that Matija posted and get on our beta testers link, because we're going to be really excited to release that to our beta testers first and hear from you all how you're enjoying the site.
Great. So for the Residency site, how does it handle streets, parks, cemeteries, and just places that there are no housing?
That's a great question, and it is something that our site takes into account. The parcels, so I'm just gonna actually go back to the site and show or answer this question a little bit more directly. If you can still see my site. So all of the parcels that are colored in, those are parcels that have a residential use, but we still try to do our best to represent other parcels. So if I click on this, this is a field. They get categorized in different ways. They obviously don't have any residential units on them, so they appear clear. But this one, for instance, it says it's a tax exempt public, charitable or institutional use. In this case, we know it's a park. But it'll all appear on the site. And when we're drawing these districts, when it calculates district-wide density, because I saw a question on this too, it will just take the area of this shape. If I look at this, it's going to take the area of the shape as the denominator, as the per acre, and the number of units is the total number of units from the parcels itself. So if there's a parking here, for instance, that'll all factor into that denominator. But in the numerator, it's just going to be counting up the total number of units. So that's how those numbers, how we derive those calculations.
And does that take into account roads, utilities?
Yes, so the roads would also be just in that the denominator has more to do with like the district shape that you draw. So all the roads that are in there, they're going to be represented as just the base acreage.
And if I could just expand on that for just a second, we had to choose one methodology for determining density, and this is the one that we chose. And so it does include everything that is within that shape that you draw. But because we're making that data available and because we're providing those estimates, the estimates on the parcel level, you can download the data, sum up the area of your parcels and the total units, and you can derive other metrics for density that suit your needs. So we will be releasing a detailed methodology with the site that tells you exactly how we're calculating that density. But we'd also love to hear from you. You know, if you're looking for additional ways to calculate density, I think that's something that we could look at for the future of the site.
Thank you. How does the variance in the capacities of parcels and towns without public sewer, like septic only, work with these tools?
Great question. And I love this question because it gives me an opportunity to reinforce the message that Matija shared around the difference between the capacity of a site to have housing and the existing density. And so this tool is not measuring capacity on a site. It's not measuring the capacity under zoning. It's not measuring the capacity as allowed by the infrastructure or the wastewater treatment. This is a representation of the structures that are on the ground today. And that's a really, really important distinction, especially because we're talking about the MBTA communities compliance today. And I just want to draw a very clear distinction between this tool, Residensity, and some of the tools that are coming out to measure compliance with MBTA communities, and specifically the compliance model that Nate and Chris talked about. Two very different tools measuring two different things. So just glad I got the opportunity to double down on that message.
Thank you.
Hey, Tom, Claire, if I may just jump in there. Thank you so much, Tom. That's a great clarification. And I think there was at least one question about around TODEX for the communities that don't have transit stations. And so obviously the TODEX doesn't necessarily help you because it is just geared around station areas. As a plug, I do use it almost every day. So TODEX is a very useful tool for me. But the land maps that will be part of the compliance model will cover every parcel in every community with the according to the definitions that are in the guidelines for Section 3A. So I just want to be clear to folks that the tools and the data that is coming in November will be available for each community. You don't have to derive your own GIS layers. It will be provided for you. So I just wanted to be clear about that. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Chris. Building type seems to be mixed in with ownership, i.e. condos. You want to kind of chat about that?
Sure, and this comes down to our source data. We've built Residensity off of a few publicly available data sources. The primary data source is town assessors. And this is data that's aggregated and made available for all 351 cities and towns by MassGIS. They've done a fantastic job standardizing that information and getting up-to-date information from towns, but the primary use of that data source is not Residensity, right? This is your town assessors as they assess taxes, and we're limited to the codes that are being used for that purpose. And so absolutely, form of tenure, condo versus rental is not something that's well handled in that data set. And so we do kind of get this somewhat weird blend, especially around condos in terms of the building types. And that's just something that's not, we're not able to overcome in the data. But the residential density statistics and the total units are still helpful regardless of that building form. It's just a limitation in those data sources.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you. And I'm gonna read this one verbatim because it's a little lengthy. About water and sewer, infrastructure can be adjusted, but what about the water source? A permit is required for surface water withdrawal. The permit is for a limited amount of water per DEP regulations at the time. There's another state requirement for increased housing. The housing may be affordable, but providing drinking water offsets the affordability. I think that's kind of answering part of your question, but if you want to address that, Tom.
Yeah, I think this question might be a little bit more aimed at MBTA communities compliance than it is around Residensity, but I'm going to take from it something helpful for me, and it's thinking about what other layers we might provide in Residensity to provide some of that context around capacity, around infrastructure. And I think water sourcing, where your water comes from, how you handle wastewater, I think that's a really crucial component in understanding why we have the residential density patterns that we have and some of the limitations around that. And it's a really important thing to look at when you're planning for your MBTA district and understanding where you actually do have that capacity for increased density and what some of those limitations are for neighborhoods in your town. So I think that's how I'd expound upon that. And Claire, if I might just maybe pop in here with our own kind of questions for attendees. I did pose that question earlier in the session around what other data sources and what other kinds of tools and information you might want to see. I'd love it if folks could pop into the chat or even raise your hand. We can maybe call on a few folks to share their thoughts on tools and resources that they might like to see. And an alternative, if you don't like that prompt, we have another prompt. If you have a challenge for us, we can pop into the Residensity site. You want to tell us a neighborhood you want to look at and you want to measure for density. Matia's been waiting for a live demo of that kind of functionality. So if you want to take the stage here and share a neighborhood in your town that you'd like us to map on the fly, we'd love to do that too. Great, thanks, Eric, for that bit. I think that's absolutely true. Alicia, great suggestion. Matija, you're up. Let's take a look at Newton Center in Residensity and let's see what we can glean from the website.
Let's do it. It's very exciting. I just need to share my screen again. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Good. Okay, great. I'm going to do it in a fun way. We can put Newton Center in the search bar here. And it'll take us straight to Newton Center. And can you remind me who asked the question? Feel free to go off mute if you want. Just
Yeah, it was Alicia Bowman. Alicia, I would invite you to maybe, if you're comfortable, share a little bit, come off mute and talk a little bit about the neighborhood.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for this presentation. So I'm a city councilor and a Newton Center resident. And yes, I'm excited to see the outcome of our efforts to comply with the MBTA zoning. So I'm excited about that. But Newton Center, and I had asked the question earlier about the complete mapping together MBTA zoning and complete neighborhoods, because Newton Center is on its way to becoming a complete neighborhood. And it would be great to see more housing here, but we also don't want to lose the great restaurants and the bakeries and the stores and sort of all of that. So yeah, so not being able to require retail on the first floor as part of the MBTA zoning is a little scary, even for the people like myself who are strong housing advocates. Especially in an area that's currently our biggest business district. So Newton is a community of 13 villages, but really sort of 8 to 9 sort of big village centers like this, and this is our largest one. And we have a T service and buses that run through here, and it's very walkable to parks and areas and schools. I don't know what else I should tell you.
No, that's perfect.
Poke around a little bit here.
And the home to like 5 bakeries. We have 5
Yeah.
amazing bakeries right there. It's insane. So yes.
So I'll just
Good sales
walk
pitch.
through a little bit of what I see here on the site. But so right here in Newton Center, we can see most of this is commercial. It's grayed out in most cases, and correct us if we're wrong.
Yeah.
See, we have some.
So
parks.
this is all for like 1 to 2 story commercial.
Gotcha. It's nice to be
So
here. So one thing that we can do is just to a really sort of crude district around Newton Center here. I'm just going to draw a nice circle in the area.
So can I ask a question while you're doing that? So you see down there with Crystal Lake, and you see that part that's like a little kidney shaped dark. How dense is that right
This one
there?
here. This one, so this is a condominium development with 35 units at 20.53 units per acre.
Yeah, that's great. That's
This
a
one-
post-World War II condominium development, like 700 square foot units, 2-bedroom units.
That's super cool. Yeah, one thing that we're also thinking about adding to the site, I would love if there'd just be a way to like click on the address and it can maybe take you to like Google Maps or somewhere else. We can get more information, because it's awesome getting that local context. Here's some other nearby ones. I don't know if this is a newer building. We might think about adding year built on here. It's sort of a
Right.
inconsistent field from the assessors data, but it'd be great to just get a sense of how recent things are. This is another condominium, 26 units.
Yeah.
33.5 units per acre, so pretty high density. Yeah, one thing it's just sort of one way of looking at the site is, if I just want to draw a big circle around Newton Center, we can just get a sense here of what we have right around, the center of Newton Center. So we have a lot of single family homes, some condominiums, and I appreciate that comment earlier. It is sort of a tricky category, so it's hard to know exactly what it is. But we also have plenty of 2 families, housing authority somewhere, I'm not sure where. Apartments over 8 units, 3 families, and so on.
We have housing authority along Center Street, actually multiple locations in this area.
Another thing that we can do is, if we open up this attribute table here, we can, it's just going to pick up the parcels that are in this district that we drew, so we can sort them, for example, by the different use codes.
Can I say wow? I'm so excited for this tool to come out.
Thank you so much. No, we're really excited to release this. We're just working out some like last little accuracy things that we want to make sure we have right before we put it out. So one thing we can do is the 2 housing authority blocks that I mentioned. There might be more. I guess this is off Cypress Street, so we might be missing some. Oh, no, here's another one right here.
So this is Counselor Pam Wright from Newton, and I see some of the housing is not marked as housing on here. It is
Yeah.
missing.
Very, very possible. In which areas?
Right near the T, if you blow it up.
Yeah.
So that right on Union Street, right over to the left a little bit, or Union, and a
Right.
little to the left, there's these condos up a little bit.
Yeah, so this is,
Up this
so
way.
where Union Street bends, there's a parcel there that's an
Just on the
apartment
other side
building.
of that one. Yep, right
Is
there.
it-
Yeah, right there. That's an apartment building.
So what we have on this one, unknown residential. The issue is actually I'll let Tom.
Yeah, I just want to jump in because I want to be mindful of time here too. And I know that Claire wants to do some wrap up. This is a great segue and a great way to end the Q&A because we've done our best. There are 2.25 million parcels that we've analyzed, and we've used all available data sets to make good decisions about units and use codes. But we know that it's not 100% perfect. And this is where collaboration comes in. And we'd love to hear from you when we've got something wrong, because it's a chance to modify our methodology, do better next time, and just make sure that we're recognizing all those housing units that you want to see on the site. And so the site's never going to be done. We're going to be doing really frequent updates on this data to make it as fresh and as accurate as possible. So again, thank you, Alicia, for going out on a limb and helping us demo the tool. But with that, I think I'm going to turn things back over to Claire to wrap us up.
Thanks, Tom. Yes, Alicia, thank you for being the brave person to do that. We really appreciate it. So, as always, want to respect your time and get us out of here. We want to thank all of our speakers. It is our hope that from this session, you all walk away feeling a little more empowered and at ease when it comes to all of this. Join us next week for session 6 of this series, and that's exploring housing at different densities, and it'll be presented by folks at SERPED, which stands for Southeastern Regional Planning and Economic Development District. And also, please check the chat for some really helpful links. They're displayed here on your screen, but you'll also find them in the chat if you have some time to go ahead and review those. Other than that, thank you. Thank you again to our presenters, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon.